Hey everybody, it's Missy
and April,
and we're here with our podcast, Sheela Na Gig. Welcome everybody. Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween.
That's right. It's very exciting. It's the haunting month. It's October. And each week, of course, we present and explore our own Sheela Na Gig, a woman whose strength and perseverance has led her to greatness and who empowers us and whose story we want to share with you, somebody who inspires us. And it could be somebody you haven't heard of, or it could be maybe somebody that you have heard of, but perhaps, you should know a little bit more. Sometimes these stories are told incorrectly. Sometimes they're just not given the light they deserve. So we just want to do that.
We've been shocked by a few Sheelas that we thought we knew.
Yeah, that is definitely true. And just want to say it is our Halloween episode.
It is.
Yet another Halloween episode. Last week you heard about the Salem witches.
Yeah.
And we're keeping it spooky. For Halloween, we're keeping it spooky with a Halloween Sheela for you. And I am very excited about it. But how are you, April? What's going on?
I am well. I'm trying to think of what's going on. Nothing that really comes to mind.
No.
Yeah. How about you? What's going on?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Halloween's it's a busy time of year. Ellery just got.
Wait. I can give a shout out to my son, Sam Grossinger, and his girlfriend, Alora Williams.
That's right.
Because they are, we live near Magic Mountain.
Yeah.
And they are doing Fright Fest for Magic Mountain. They both got jobs there, and they're scaring the heck out of people.
And they're scary as fuck. Let me tell you, I've seen their pictures, and I've seen them getting ready, and they're scary as fuck.
Yeah. Alora has blood coming out of her eyes. It's very convincing.
Yeah, she looks like a doll. She's got
a scary doll.
Yeah, scary doll with like a little pinafore, and then these giant eyes with like blood coming out. It's well done.
My son asked me to go to Fright Fest, but I told him I was too scared.
Aw, I'll go with you, April. I don't really like that stuff either. I told you I'm going to the haunted hayride. I'm a little scared.
That's right. Yeah.
But I'll go with you.
Okay.
Let me go with you. Let's go and support Sam and Laura. That'd be good. Yeah, and Ellery's, she's got to have 2 Halloween costumes. Apparently, one for school and one for trick or treating. So trying to put it all together. Usually. On Halloween, we have like 5 girls sleep over after trick or treating. We're always the Halloween, sleepover. So
do they have school the next day?
No, they always have the day off, which I think is so good.
That's smart. Yeah, that's great.
But this year I'm flying to Detroit on November 1st, so I just have to make sure my husband is okay having 5 girls.
No problem.
Yeah. But it's all good. It'll be fun.
Awesome.
And but again. Happy Halloween!
Happy Halloween! So who's your Sheela? Your Halloween Sheela?
Well, I'm going to start out with some song lyrics.
Mm-hmm.
You ready?
Mm-hmm. Go
Down in Louisiana, where the black trees grow, lives a voodoo lady named Marie Laveau. She got a black cat tooth and mojo bone, and anyone who wouldn't leave her alone, she'd go, another man done gone. She lives in a swamp in a hollow log with a one-eyed snake and a 3-legged dog, bent bony body and stringy hair. If she ever seen you messing around there, she'd go, another man done gone.
Ooh.
What do you think about that?
One-eyed snake and 3-armed dogs.
Did you say 3-armed dog?
What'd you say?
I said a 3-legged dog.
3-legged
dog. Arms, April. Let's get it straight here. Jeez.
Sorry.
Oh my God.
Oh my God. Tell me about your Sheela. What does this have to do with the song?
Well, did you hear the name I said?
Yes.
Lives a voodoo lady named Marie Laveau. Marie Laveau. Do you know Marie Laveau is?
I don't.
Really?
I don't.
It's so funny because I thought everybody knew who Marie Laveau was. I thought that was just a household sort of. But I think because my dad's family is from the South and Cajun and from Louisiana, from New Orleans, it's just part of it's part of my story. It's part of, I always heard stories of Marie Laveau my whole life. And in fact, my grandma used to say there was a little, like, it was almost like a sing-songy nursery rhyme. I remember when I was a kid, she used to say. And I looked to find it, and I could not find it. But the part I remember is, down by the swamp where the cattails grow lived a voodoo queen named Marie Laveau. And then she had something else, and she went into it, and but that's the only part I remember. So that song, the first song that I read the lyrics to, it's a song by Baxter Taylor and Shel Silverstein. And you may or may not have heard the song, probably not if you don't know who Marie Laveau is.
No.
I said everyone knows her name, but her story is shrouded in mystery. But I guess that's not necessarily true. Not everybody knows her name, apparently, because April doesn't know.
Because I don't know, unless everybody excludes me.
Oh, it's if you watch American Horror Story, you probably know who she is too. But please, that was a very poor depiction, which we will get to in this episode.
Okay.
Very poor depiction of Marie Laveau. But I want to tell you a little bit about her. She was one of the few free black people and a powerful woman of high stature in New Orleans during the 19th century when slavery was still legal. She holds a legacy that is still strong in today's society for being the voodoo queen of New Orleans and also for the contribution she made to society.
Okay.
And Marie Laveau was a Louisiana Creole, so a so-called free woman of color, historical term applied to black and mixed race people who were not enslaved. So she was also a practitioner of voodoo, an herbalist, a hairdresser, a nurse. Here we go.
Oh, here we go.
She worked at the Dead Letter. No, I'm lying. I'm lying. She did not work in the Dead Letter office. Okay. She was a nurse and an independent businesswoman. She was also a mother, a midwife, and a healer.
I love it. How come your Sheelas, more than mine, have like 16 different vocations? I don't know.
It is kind of true, isn't it?
It is.
I don't know. Well, maybe it's because I go down so many avenues.
Right.
Because that does happen sometimes. Like, I'll be going down like a new little tributary to find out more, and I'll be like, oh my gosh, look at this. She was also a banker. Things that you don't see in the other normal regular articles, so maybe that's why. Maybe I'm digging for it. I'm digging for the multiple
and she didn't
occupations.
She didn't work for the Dead Letter office.
She did not.
Okay.
She did not, April.
Ah.
And she was, this independent businesswoman, though, and she lived her life in accordance with the corporal works of mercy.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
She was renowned in New Orleans as the most powerful voodoo priestess of the 19th century.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I guess people didn't mess with her.
No. There was a lot of, myth around her, a lot of stories. Again, I think because my dad grew up there and my grandma was from there. My grandmother, my grandfather were from there, my whole family. So I think that, again, it was a rich part of kind of the mythical fabric, the mythical weaved fabric of New Orleans. You notice I say Nolans.
No.
I have to stop myself because I want to say Nolans because that's how my family said it my whole life. But I'm trying to say New Orleans. New Orleans. Yeah. So here we go. Laveau was born in New Orleans French Quarter on Thursday, September 10th, 1801. And her mother, Marguerite d'Arcantel, was a free woman of African, European, and Native American ancestry. Because Laveau's mother was not married at the time of her birth, her father was not identified on her birth certificate or her baptismal record. But the most probable candidate is a fella named Charles Laveau. He was the son of Charles Laveau Trudeau, who was a white Louisiana Creole and a politician. Marie grew up on her father's plantation briefly, where she was educated, and then she studied to be a hairdresser. And she was also a devout Catholic from the time she was very young. And she went to Mass every day of her life.
A devout Catholic voodoo
Yeah.
lady. Okay.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And she was Catholic her whole life. Her whole life. And so...
Interesting.
Yeah. So she later lived on St. Anne Street. It was a cottage of her maternal grandmother, Catherine Henry. And she lived there throughout the rest of her life. And she went on to raise her own family there in the same house, and she would often open up her house to those in need as well. So everybody kind of knew about the house on St. Anne Street. And it was said that Marie was a striking woman, that she dressed like a gypsy with a bandana on her head. She wore these flashy rings on her fingers and gold bracelets on her wrists, and her dress was always a dark color. And she had these eyes. Everybody talked about her beautiful eyes. They were really large, and they were hazel, and everyone said they sparkled like emeralds.
Wow. Sounds striking.
Yeah, and then she had this, this dark skin, and said that everybody talked about how just exceptionally beautiful she was.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. But since no photos exist of her,
no photos exist,
only unsubstantiated portraits and drawings, we will never really know, unfortunately, what she looked like. There is a photo of her daughter, at least one. There's probably more than one of her daughter who had the same name, Marie Laveau, but it is not her. So there's much speculation, though, about how Marie became the Voodoo queen. Some say she trained under the guidance of Sonate Didi, and that was she was considered New Orleans' first Voodoo queen. So she wasn't as popular as Marie Laveau, but she was considered the first Voodoo queen.
So was Marie Laveau like her apprentice? She apprenticed under her?
I don't know if she did it. She knowingly.
I see. Yeah.
But yes. And others suspect because of her mixed race heritage, she was raised with a mix of Christianity and Voodoo. And it's possible. Perhaps all of that is true. But we know that there was both Christianity, Catholicism present in her life. And then whether she learned the Voodoo along the way or she was raised with some Voodoo, that's for interpretation, basically. Okay. Some said that she was the granddaughter of this powerful priestess in Saint Dominique, which is now Haiti.
Oh, okay.
So there was also speculation of that she was this granddaughter of this, Haitian powerful voodoo priestess. So that could have been true, too.
In the bloodline.
But reportedly she had familial background in African spirituality as well, and she was drawn to religion after the death of her mother. So at that point, Laveau underwent the tutelage of Dr. John Bayou, a well-known root worker. And by the way, root worker is another term that you're going to hear during this time. So a root worker is a practitioner of root work, which is basically it's an African-American type of, some say, folk magic and a healing tradition.
Oh. Do we know how old she was when her mother died?
Not really sure. Not sure. I think she was in her late teens, though.
Okay.
Yeah. Because she lived with her grandmother and her mother at the house in St. Anne. Yeah. And so anyway, a root worker who does the folk magic and healing tradition, and this all originated in the American South. So these root workers are known as conjure doctors sometimes too. And so they can also be known as conjure men and women or just root doctors. So they all, again, take this kind of spirituality. It's a healing thing. Some say it's a folk magic, but they're called root workers. Mm-hmm. So she also studied with many root workers. And we do know that she did not take long to dominate the culture and society of voodoo in New Orleans. And for many decades, Marie held a captivated New Orleans spellbound and still does to this day.
Ooh.
Nobody has outmatched her since her reign.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to step back and I want to talk about voodoo for a moment.
Okay, please do. On this Halloween month.
Yes, it's a good time to talk about voodoo.
It's a great time.
Right? Yes. I didn't really know that much about voodoo, but I learned a lot about voodoo. But basically, New Orleans voodoo specifically is the only Afro-Catholic religion to emerge in North America.
No,
So it's considered an Afro-Catholic religion.
Huh.
Yeah. When you were earlier, you were saying, wait a second, she went.
Yeah, right. It
sounded voodoo, but so basically, New Orleans voodoo was born of the influence of not only the African nations that were at the root of the religion, but also the New World colonies that had brought in African slaves. Mm-hmm. So in the 1700s, there were many enslaved, sadly, in Haiti, Cuba, Brazil, as well as in Louisiana. Mm-hmm. And it was the Haitian Revolution that began in 1791 that had the most significant influence in the creation of New Orleans voodoo. And it was the frightening stories of the revolution that heightened the fear of the religion in the white community, unfortunately. So it's likely that this influx of African and Haitian slave was coming in. They were coming to Louisiana, they were coming into New Orleans, and their practices began to blend. So incorporating all these practices into now what is known as New Orleans voodoo. In addition to being a voodoo priestess, though, as we talked about, Marie Laveau was also a lifelong Roman Catholic. So she was baptized, she attended Catholic Mass every day, she later married, and she had her children baptized in the Catholic Church as well. So her home was filled with images of saints, which is very common for Catholics. She ministered to others, offering guidance to redemption and forgiveness through Jesus Christ. And she was a woman filled with compassion, strong religious faith, and a clear intention to help the people in her community through both voodoo and Catholicism.
Wow.
So many people living in New Orleans at the time, they blended. It wasn't an uncommon thing.
Yeah.
It was not an uncommon thing to blend Catholicism and voodoo.
Gotcha.
And they kind of blended into a single hybrid belief system. And although Laveau is often depicted as a witch or, an agent of evil or the devil, many sources indicate that it's totally untrue. She was never evil. She was never casting evil spells. There's just so much myth around her, unfortunately. But she was a woman who was taking care of the sick, ministering to inmates in prison.
She was really a healer.
She was a healer, is what she was. Exactly. And she served as a midwife, and she nurtured unwanted babies until she could find homes for them.
Oh, wow.
It's said that she had babies, just like she would just take babies in.
Oh, my goodness.
And try to find a family for them.
Wow.
Yeah. So she was pretty amazing woman. But this hybrid commercial spiritual space unfortunately did not come without a price. Of course.
Usually does.
Right. So the local police were, continually harassing her, and she kept them at bay with the mere threat of her conjure. Fortunately.
So maybe she did help promote sort of
that comes up later. So there were times I think that she did use it so that she could protect her people and what she was actually doing. Because there was no...
But why would the police go after her? What kinds of things?
People complained. They would complain. You'll see. She did a lot of different types of rituals and things. And, so people would complain, and I think people made things up. I think they made stories up, kind of like the witches of Salem. Yeah. So...
well, it reminds me once a friend of mine and I used to go to these sweat lodges in the backyard of this woman's house, and she lived in a perfectly normal suburb in Northridge, California. But the sweat lodges, everybody would get naked and crawl into this dark hut and sweat.
Right.
And it was actually a very spiritual Native American ceremony. But she would sing, and she had this loud, booming voice, and we'd all sing. And,
were you naked too, April?
Yeah, in the hot, dark hut,
Wow.
So, anyway, she would say to us, I didn't warn my neighbors because I didn't know what to say, so the police might show up.
Oh my gosh, did they?
Never when I was there, but apparently they had in the past. So.
Wow.
Anyway, I digress.
No, that's pretty funny. I mean, as a musician, obviously, I've played a lot of, parties and events, and the police have often showed up. I always say it's not, it's not a real show until the police
come.
But, they definitely harassed her a bit. And journalists often mocked her, too. She was mocked in local newspapers with the most salacious stories, going viral the old-fashioned way. So they were copied and distributed in newspapers around the nation.
Oh, wow.
So people knew who she was, and they knew these crazy stories about what she was capable of. And unfortunately, those stories really focused on evil deeds, not all the wonderful things that she was actually doing.
Wow.
So Marie Laveau excelled at navigating a very oppressive, racist society, essentially. And voodoo is not celebrated in large, expensive houses of worship with opulent decorations and silver and gold, But voodoo evolved as a poor person's, worse than poor, an enslaved person's faith. So to this day, voodoo takes place in humble places instead of, again, these opulent churches with, stained glass and carvings.
Right.
So instead of extravagance, people smoke cigars. They instead of wine and some kind of golden chalice, they drink their cheap rum and they pass it around, sip from a bottle. So it's very different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's even different than Catholicism.
Mm-hmm.
But again, we're talking about kind of this hybrid here.
Right.
So there's this thing called gree-gree, and they're called gree-gree bags, and this is a huge part of the voodoo practice. So a gree-gree bag is basically a little bag, a little pouch, and it contains a variety of items that are used as little charms for protection and good luck or other purposes. And so you put them in your little gree-gree bag and you carry your gree-gree bag. Mm-hmm. And this is something, it's protection.
Yeah.
It's basically protection. And if you think about it, it's not that different than, Catholicism and statues and candles and little pendants of saints. And, it's really not that different.
Mm-hmm.
But people often saw it as, you're praying to these lesser deities and communicating with spirits and placing, these offerings at altars. It's all, common practice in many faiths, but for some reason in voodoo, people were really freaked out by it. And so these, what they considered secret, uncivilized practices, generated pure fear in the white community. Mm-hmm. And Laveau and her fellow voodoo practitioners may not have discouraged their first.
Well, I was just thinking that it's not like voodoo is common, or I should say maybe it's my own ignorance and I don't realize it, but voodoo has always maintained to me this mainstream, mysterious, evil, harming way
voodoo
practice.
Dolls.
Exactly.
You think that's the first thing you think of as a voodoo doll, right?
So I think it's funny that she didn't discourage the scarier or more negative perceptions, but
right. Well, it's in the same way that she kind of kept them, at bay with the threat of her conjure. It's just
was that a way for her to keep her power, or
I think so.
Yeah,
I think it was. And it says here that it was these white people, but I will say, and I get to that too, she had white and black followers. She, and I should say, people of all races.
Yeah, she
didn't have it wasn't just people of color that were following her. It was white people as well. Even very wealthy. A lot of very wealthy white people kind of sought her out.
Oh wow!
So because she was so powerful, she got results. So, but there was no seduction darker than voodoo, which completely enraptured the city of New Orleans at the time. There was thought to be something just otherworldly about New Orleans. I think there still is, there's just this allure of the ethereal.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, there's something very special. And some people find it really, I don't know, a little haunting, a little...
in some ways bewitching. There's something very magical to me, it seems. Yeah.
Sure. Have you been there?
You know what? I haven't been there. I've read so much about it and seen so much about it that it carries an allure, and I'm acting like I have been, and I haven't.
Yeah.
And yet somehow it just grabs my imagination.
Yeah.
I can't wait to go.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. I've been lucky to go. Only a couple of times, and not until I was in my 30s, actually, which is so sad because I knew my relatives because they would come visit and I knew them, but my first trip was the year before Katrina, actually.
Oh my gosh!
And I'm so glad that I went at that time.
Yeah, how fortunate to see it.
And then I went back after that, which is quite different. But anyway, so at the center of it all, though, was this revered Marie Laveau, the voodoo priestess, with her mysterious legend entwining the city that she ruled. And many say she facilitated the rise of the still thriving voodoo culture of New Orleans.
Oh, wow.
Pretty amazing lady. So nobody really knows how Marie spent her days or her nights, but the story is told that basically she just started out as a hairdresser to these wealthy white women.
Oh, interesting.
So remember I was telling you earlier she was educated and she was also studying to become a hairdresser. So as a young woman in her late teens, early 20s, she started, doing hair. And again, she was working for a lot of wealthy white women. And eventually she opened her own salon. And she became very popular because these women would come to her and they felt very comfortable kind of confessing their darkest secrets, sharing their fears. And, eventually she would kind of offer to help them a little bit. So they started actually approaching her for help with family disputes, health, finances, you name it.
Kind of like a bartender.
Yes, very much like a bartender, right?
Right.
So she started inviting these same women, she started inviting them to gatherings. And she started creating these gatherings for people to come where she would offer advice, and then she sold gris-gris, the little bags, to anyone who needed, a cure or a charm. Basically, this kind of originated again in Africa. It was believed to, protect the wearer from evil, to bring good luck. So she sold all these little amulets, just little things that would protect the person or perhaps, again, cure something. But she sold magical powders too. And these were to grant desires or even to destroy one's enemies. So there were some things that, destroying enemies, I don't know how Catholic that is. But,
but it does sound like what I think of with in my ignorance about voodoo.
Right. I know. So she was in the midst of her rising fame. And again, she was in her late teens. She was 18 at the time. And she met Jacques Perry, a free person of color from Haiti. And he was a cabinet maker. And on August 4th, 1819, she married him. And they went to live in the French Quarter together of New Orleans. So she briefly lived separately from the house with her grandmother on Ann Street, although she goes back there. So, but their marriage certificate is still preserved in St. Louis Cathedral in New Orleans to this day.
Oh, wow.
I know, I got to go see it.
We can go visit.
Now that I've done, I want to go back and do a whole, Marie Laveau. Because when I went, I remember we did go to a couple voodoo stores. We did, there's a couple things we did. Because I was interested in that. I was interested in Marie Laveau at the time, but I didn't know about that I could see the marriage certificate or,
Yeah. We talked about doing a podcast from Salem, Massachusetts, and then, we can go to New Orleans.
I'm excited.
Yeah.
We're going to start doing some road trips. I just cannot wait. All right. So this couple went on to have two daughters, Félicité and Marie Angélie Perry, who sadly both died in childhood.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And in 1824, Jacques Perry mysteriously disappeared.
Dun, 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 dun.
So I know. So this is a little controversial. Marie insisted that he had died and that she was now a widow. And for whatever reason, Perry was out of her life and she was left with two children to raise.
So this was before their children died.
Yeah. So following the custom of the time, Laveau began calling herself the Widow Perry, or the Widow Paris. So the Widow Paris was much more likely to spend days in service to others. She was a generous woman, and she was known to use basically her means and her magic to help those in need. She staged ceremonies, she dispensed those charms and potions, and she even told fortunes, and she healed the sick. So she continued to do all of these things, but due to her reputation as a powerful voodoo practitioner, a lot of the people in New Orleans at the time believed that Marie Laveau may have used her abilities to cause her husband's disappearance or even his death.
It does sound like the Salem witch trial.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So, because he kind of vanished without a trace. And it just kind of led to the speculation that she had harmed him through her magical means. And however, there's really no historical evidence to support this claim. And, his disappearance is probably more attributed to other factors like, he left the city without informing anybody. Some suggest that he was really freaked out by her power. That it just might have been really overwhelming for him.
More he could take.
Yeah. And he decided that he needed to move on. And a lot of people said he settled in Baton Rouge. There was work in Baton Rouge, so some people went up there. And so there's a lot of speculation. And I will say that it's interesting because there's a woman who did a whole research project on finding him.
Uh-huh.
And she believes she found him.
Oh,
interesting. That he did
in
go to
Baton
Baton
Rouge.
Rouge. Yeah.
Wouldn't that be funny? All this mysterious, rumor and, all that. The dude's hanging out.
Exactly. Exactly.
So enough of his wife and kids.
Exactly, but that's, yeah. So maybe that's probably what happened. If anybody's interested, it's an interesting take on the whole story.
Uh-huh.
So in the early days of Marie Laveau's rise to fame, her clientele consisted mainly of people of color, country folk, and other free people of color whose long association with the practices of voodoo and root workers made her a natural attraction to them. So it didn't take her long to just start dominating the whole culture, the society, and establishing herself as that queen of voodoo.
So it's interesting because it's really took off when her husband left, disappeared, died, whatever happened.
Yeah.
Isn't that funny? Huh?
Yeah. I mean, she was already...
Yeah.
We know she was already having these gatherings with these women, her clientele, from the hair salon. We know this was happening, but it was growing. It was growing, and her following was growing, and I'm sure too, she, he leaves, and she's suddenly a single mom of these two children, who unfortunately we know died later, but she probably was, needing to make money too.
Right.
So
right. Yes.
her services,
and
came with a fee.
A talent. Yeah.
Although I did read many times that if the person couldn't afford it, she would help them. Yeah. So in 1826, she went to enter a domestic partnership with a white man of noble French descent. His name was Christophe Dominique de Glapion, which lasted until Glapion died in 1855. So interracial relationships were also not uncommon in New Orleans at the time, although the couples were never allowed to marry. It was completely forbidden by law for a white person.
But didn't you say they registered as a domestic partner?
Yeah, you could register as a domestic partner, but you could not marry if you were white and the other person was a person of color or mixed race.
Okay, I'm sure that makes sense to somebody, but go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think it's pretty fucked up myself. But anyway, the Laveau Glapion family continued to live in the French Quarter. And at this point, they moved to St. Anne Street in that dwelling that Marie's grandmother had built. They decided to go back there and kind of start their own family. And they had many children together. Oh. And the accounts vary on exactly how many children. But we do know that only 2 survived into adulthood.
Oh.
Which is really sad again.
Yeah, that is so sad.
Yeah. And again, she also took in a lot of babies. We know that too.
Right. I wonder, did she keep any?
Not that I know. Not that I know. But both of her daughters were named Marie. We talked about that before. That was like a common thing, Mary, like I remember this Catholic family and everybody was named Mary, but it was like Mary Louise, Mary, Mary Catherine. So her daughters, I don't know exactly what their middle names were, but they were both named Marie as well. And then in the 1830s, Marie Laveau's combination of clairvoyance, her healing abilities, her beauty, her charisma, her showmanship, she had intimidation, she had this business sense, and it enabled her to just continue to assume leadership of this, multiracial religious community. And she continued to give consultations. She held those weekly ceremonies at this point at her home on St. Anne Street. And she started performing exorcisms as well and offering sacrifices to the spirits.
Wow. What kind of sacrifices?
I don't know exactly, but I know they were not human sacrifices.
Or little animals?
They might have been little animals. Who knows?
Tell me they're animals.
I don't know.
We don't know.
Okay. We don't quite know.
All right.
But
we're moving on.
But some say that she also staged ceremonies in which participants became possessed by voodoo spirits. Oh. So, but kind of the idea of that is, my understanding is that these voodoo spirits would kind of, they would fill this person in order to release this evil, to take the evil with them. Oh. So they would kind of move. So it was actually
a healing.
It was a healing. The spirit, the voodoo spirit would move through the body and take away the evil with it. It would, that was kind of my understanding from what I read about that. She's also credited with leading what was called the St. John's Eve celebrations on the shores of Lake Pontchartrain. And these annual events derived from a European pre-Christian celebration of the summer solstice. And it had bonfires and drumming and singing and dancing and ritual bathing and a giant communal feast. Yeah. So it was kind of like a giant festival.
Yeah,
giant festival. And much of the white world began to dismiss her at this point as an evil occultist, reveling in black magic and harboring devilish power.
Oh, no.
Mm-hmm. And they even accused her of holding drunken orgies. But again, to the believers of New Orleans, she was just simply this amazing, gifted healer.
Mm.
Yeah. So John Kendall was a writer of the time, and he was a self-professed expert on Marie Laveau.
Mm-hmm.
And he wrote, "After dark, you might see carriages roll up to Marie's door, and the veiled ladies, elegantly attired, descend and hurry in to buy what the old witch had for sale. An errant fraud, no doubt, but money poured into her lap down to the last day of her evil life."
I love the way you're reading.
I know. Mr. Kendall was not a fan of Miss Laveau. Perhaps he was one of those many that thought Laveau was part of the dark arts, which is unfortunate. And, you know, again, because the core value of New Orleans voodoo is actually about protection.
Wow.
We know that. We know that now.
Well, I learned that today.
We learned that today. That's right. So the newspapers would employ people to go and sit in trees and like hide in bushes, hide out, and
waiting to see evil.
So they could, you know, spy on her and conjure up, you know, fabulous lies about her life, essentially. And one newspaper once branded her the notorious hag who reigns over the ignorant and superstitious. It's also said that many people, of course, feared her power. So this is what happens when people fear.
Right?
Yes. Again, Salem witches.
Mm-hmm.
So those stories about, you know, wild sexual orgies and sacrificed black cats were recounted and repeatedly told in newspapers and books, and frenzied crowds of naked people were said to have fallen under Marie Laveau's evil voodoo spells.
Oh, my.
You know, they could have observed these voodoo spirits working through the person. They could have observed that. I mean, I can imagine that would be maybe a little freaky to watch.
I would imagine, yeah.
You know, so hard to say.
You just mix fear with something you've never seen before, and anything can happen.
Anything, that you don't know about, it can be very scary. So Marie and her voodoo religion were often demonized by that unforgiving press. And then others, you know, would say she's a saint.
Mm.
So it was interesting. There was this whole dichotomy going on at the time.
Yeah.
And some even said that Marie Laveau could also be in two places at the same time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Some said that Marie Laveau lived to be 120 years old and that she never aged. And it's kind of funny because tour guides in Louisiana, they tell this tale of the switch that Marie Laveau and her daughter concocted at one point. Marie was growing older, and her daughter apparently had quite a likeness to her. So
she started posing as
apparently she
Marie Laveau.
Yeah, so she would send her out in her clothes, and then the daughter's likeness, you know, people would think it was her, and they think that she just simply wasn't aging. Mm. However, they think this was kind of made up. This is another made up sort of thing, you know. But it's, you know, it's unsupported, but it's kind of fun and interesting.
But it is interesting that there are no photographs of her.
Yeah.
So you can't really address that.
Again, but, you know, she was just part of this very, you know, seedy, brassy, just underbelly of, you know, a city that was kind of stranded in vice at the time. Mm-hmm. And it was, you know, a narrative that was being peddled by the white elite again. This narrative of this evil voodoo queen. But again, it didn't stop Laveau from attending the gatherings in Congo Square on Sundays, and she'd still sell her gris-gris bags and her potions and offer advice and service to her community and partake in celebrations. And it's here that legends talk about her singing and performing her spiritual celebrations and conjuring the great serpent spirit and becoming filled with the spirit of Loa. proudly wearing her Queen of Voodoo crown.
Ooh.
Yeah. So curious white people would often sneak again into the woods to witness these ceremonies, and for sensationalism, they would often report these extreme tales of what they witnessed. Supposedly it is true that she had a 20-foot white snake named Zombie.
Uh-huh.
She loved Zombie, and she would often dance with Zombie.
Okay. What kind of snake was Zombie? Do we know?
Sure. I'm not exactly sure. Do you know snakes, April?
Not a lot. But...
He was a large snake. And there's not, it's one of those things that was said.
Mm-hmm. Could have been.
It could have been made up.
Yeah.
Again.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting. It's kind of fun to think about a voodoo queen dancing with her snake with her special crown. And
right.
But again, it could have been one of those stories that,
just got spread.
Yeah. So one of Laveau's contemporaries described an encounter with her in the following way, and I love this encounter. It's great. It was her, all right. She came walking down the Congo street with her head up in the air like a queen. Her skirt swished when she walked, and everybody stepped back and let her pass. All the people, white and black, start saying that that's the most powerful woman there is. They say, there goes Marie Laveau. And me, I was little, and I got kind of scared. They used to scare little children then by telling them that they were going to give them to Marie Laveau. Now, let me tell you this. She was a great person, though. I don't care what nobody says. Isn't that great?
That is great.
I love that. And then another contemporary commented, Marie was the queen of them all. White and black folks used to go to her. She could keep anybody from harming you, and she could do anything you wanted done to anybody. How she used to do it, I don't know. She used to say prayers and mix different things to give to people to drink and to rub on their bodies, to throw over their shoulder, even to throw in the river. Oh, she had a million things to do. But everything would happen just like she would say. She used to get a lot of money and gifts from rich white folks. Marie Laveau is a name that was respected by everybody and dreaded by a lot of people too. Mm. So these stories continue to abound. And we've already discussed Laveau inherited this house from her grandmother. But there's a rumor too about how she obtained the house. An example of how, myths often
Let me guess. The
supersede
grandmother
facts.
Disappeared and
Exactly.
Exactly.
No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. Okay, so many, though, attributed Laveau's home ownership to her voodoo abilities, right? Mm-hmm. So, basically, there was this legend that there was a wealthy man who petitioned Laveau for help, and that man's son was accused of murder, and lawyers said the case was hopeless. So the man asked Laveau for his son's freedom, and in payment, he would grant Laveau the home on St. Anne Street. So in preparation for the trial, Laveau spent, weeks praying to Voodoo Loa, the spirits and Catholic saints in the St. Louis Cathedral. And while in prayer, Laveau held guinea peppers, which are extremely spicy, in her mouth. And when the spirits saw this willingness for her to suffer, they heard her intention. On the morning of the trial, Laveau placed those guinea peppers under the judge's seat, and the man's son was proclaimed innocent, and Marie gained that house on St. Anne.
Only how did the guy have the house? How did the guy own the house to give it to her, or
he didn't own the house? They didn't know it was in her family for years and years and years. So it's
just
new. It's ridiculous.
Okay, I'm just going down the rabbit hole of stupidity. Okay.
Yeah, you too.
I went there.
You too.
Yeah. Gullible. He didn't own it.
Yes.
Okay, moving right on.
Yes, but at the height of her power, when her mystique was talked about and constantly in the salons of the rich Creoles and the white bread Americans, Marie Laveau began to receive visits from that upper crust of society like we talked about before. And it was in her service to this sector that embroiled her in one of the greatest legends of New Orleans, which is called the Devil Baby of Bourbon Street.
Ooh.
So the story of the Devil Baby is basically, supposedly, on Bourbon Street. You can hear to this day cries of this Devil Baby.
Oh.
The crying Devil Baby of Bourbon Street. And basically involved Marie Laveau and this other woman, Delphine Lalaurie. People at the time believed the Devil Baby was the result of a curse that occurred when Marie Laveau was asked to use her voodoo magic by an unrequited lover. But more evidence suggests that the unfortunate child was a harlequin baby who suffered from a rare genetic skin disorder. A baby with this condition is basically born with thick plates of skin that tear apart as the baby grows.
Oh, dear.
Oh, it's very sad. The pictures are very sad, often causing deformity in the facial features. So sources also indicate that when the baby's mother died during the delivery and the father ran off wanting nothing to do with this disfigured child, Marie Laveau took care of that baby as her own.
Oh.
But instead of recognizing that she had done this wonderful thing by taking this child in, it was easier to blame her for that child's disfigurement.
Wow.
And the poor devil baby was demonized because he looked different rather than feel compassion for a child. And, society spurned him. So sad.
Yeah.
And the baby eventually died.
Aw.
And again, people still talk about those, sad cries from the
devil
devil baby of Bourbon Street. It's so sad.
It is sad.
That's
That's
very
terrible.
sad.
Yeah.
But we also know, I said earlier, Laveau was a successful nurse. She, nobody knows, again, there's so much unknown about her, but it's probable that she had some nursing training, that she had.
I was just going to say, did she go to nursing school?
Right.
Or is this part of her being a healer?
But being a healer,
Yeah.
I think that there was some nurse training in there as well, along with her healing. So people say that she was a wonderful, wonderful nurse. And that there was, yellow fever, there was cholera epidemics, and she was always called upon to nurse the sick.
Wow. And yet she lost so many of her own children.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Huh.
I know. It's sad.
Yeah.
It's sad. She couldn't nurse them for some reason.
Yeah.
But she always would go, and she never worried about contagion, or she would just go. She would go and pray with these people. She would bring gree. She would say prayers. She was always there. And her skill and knowledge earned her friendship and trust with some people, of course.
Uh-huh.
And then in the later years, she just continued to be more and more charitable.
Mm-hmm.
So she wasn't running as much of a business as she was in her later years, just being completely charitable. Visiting people in prison. She would eradicate altars in the cells of those condemned prisoners, and she would comfort them by praying with them before they went to the gallows.
Wow.
And she even saved several condemned from the gallows.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. People listened to her.
I guess they did.
Yeah.
Wow.
So people in the French Quarter continue to talk about her. Of course, there's still gossip, there's embellishments that surround her life in abundance. Even today, her voodoo queen stature is still very relevant and still holds true. And of course, there's been songs written about her, and she's inspired movies. There's many movies out there about her, although
questionable in terms
yes,
of
they're all very questionable.
facts.
And of course, I'm going to tell you now about that popular television show, American Horror Story.
Uh-huh.
My husband watched it.
Yeah.
But it basically had this fan cult kind of devoted to her legend. And she went from crossing the line from historical figure to famous pop culture icon 138 years after her death.
I love it.
So people who hadn't heard of Marie Laveau before, after watching American Horror Story, knew who she was. But sadly, it included a very violent, vindictive, and cruel depiction of Laveau, which makes me very sad. And it also kind of showed her killing people with her evil powers. And, on the contrary, as we now know, she cared very deeply about her community. She cared deeply about other people. She always practiced her faith and kindness. And her true nature couldn't have been any farther from, the fictional version portrayed of her, which is very sad.
That is sad.
Yeah,
But I'm
and
glad you picked her as your Sheela. Because,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So after taking a prominent stance as Voodoo Queen, Laveau reigned unchallenged until 1850. And that's when another Creole woman named Rosalie attempted to challenge Laveau's position to create an aura of fear and awe. Rosalie placed a huge life-size wooden doll in her yard that was said to have been imported from Africa.
Oh, no.
The statue was covered with beads and intricate carvings, and when people in the voodoo community began expressing fear and respect for Rosalie because of the doll, Laveau stole the statue. She's badass.
She is badass.
What are you doing, Rosalie? Huh? Steal that shit.
That's
That's
right.
right.
That.
She was taken to court by Rosalie, but she used her persuasive powers and her influence to have that doll permanently removed. And there were several other root workers and voodooists who gathered mild attention during her reign, but her reign was still unmatched, and to this day is unmatched.
Impressive.
And we know that she gave her last performance in 1875 before announcing her retirement at her home on St. Anne Street, right in the heart of the city she loved. But she could never leave the voodoo behind. Right up until her death, she visited the poor and the imprisoned, and she continued to attend to prisoners who were sentenced to death. And rumors circulated that some prisoners would receive potions or other substances before going to the gallows, but this was never proven.
Oh, wow.
You know, so they could.
So they could be more relaxed.
Yeah, they could be more relaxed, or perhaps die quicker, or that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So again, unsubstantiated,
Yeah.
but she probably did.
Yeah.
Anything
It's
to
nice
help
to think of.
other people.
Right?
Yeah. And this is a little side note, and this is a little bit of a bummer to talk about.
Yeah.
But it was something that was kind of commonplace, unfortunately, at the time. We talked about how Laveau was a free woman of color, and history tells us that Laveau and Glapion were slave owners. And so they were thought to have owned at least 7 slaves during their lifetime.
Really?
Yeah. And, it's very discouraging to think of anybody owning slaves, of course, but a woman of color to enslave other people of color is very disheartening again, but it just wasn't unusual for those times. It wasn't unusual for free blacks to purchase their own slaves. So despite her reputation as a charitable woman and an important figure in the black community, it is a little disheartening.
It is.
It's hard to wrap your head around,
Yeah, that she would liberate so many,
Yeah.
and fight for justice for people. And...
I did read that she treated her slaves very well. That she wasn't, abusive, or that she treated them well.
And we do have to remember
means.
that
They were still slaves, so I don't know exactly how to take that, but
my thought is that whenever there's a certain era and certain things are allowed, people, have a certain amount of permission, and while to us that's vile and horrible and we can't wrap our brains around it,
right.
I guess maybe for that era, if she was good to her slaves, she was somehow a better person or a better slave owner. I don't know.
Right.
Or maybe I'm just reaching.
Yeah. No, you gotta reach, because sometimes you hear about these great people and then they do things that are just not in line
with our thinking.
Yeah.
Certainly.
Not in line with not just our thinking, but who we know they are, and have learned
believe
that they
them
are.
to be. Yeah.
Or so that's just gives you a little pause. On June 15th, 1881, Marie Laveau passed peacefully in her cottage on St. Anne Street, just a few months shy of her 80th birthday. And when she died, there was a very big funeral for her, with both white and black paying their respects. The New York Times claimed lawyers, legislators, planters, and merchants all came to pay their respects. New Orleans cemetery records prove that she was interred in the Widow Paris tomb in St. Louis, number 1 cemetery.
Oh.
I know. It's interesting that she was still known as the Widow Paris.
She never got to relinquish that title.
No, she really didn't.
Even after her common law dude.
Right. Well, and it's interesting because the first time I went to New Orleans, my cousin, kind of a distant cousin, died while I was there. And I had to go to a funeral. And the funeral was in the church, and then we walked from the church to Cemetery 1, where my whole family is buried in Cemetery 1.
Wow.
Both on the Gibson side and the Roman side. My dad's whole family. So, before, people would say when I came back, did you get to go to Cemetery 1? Did you go to Cemetery 1? I'd be like, yeah, my whole family's buried there, But we got to have this jazz band follow us.
Oh, how fun.
It was a jazz funeral.
Very cool.
Into Cemetery
I guess
One.
that's a terrible thing. Oh, how fun at a funeral.
Well,
but
I kind of thought that too. And I know she was a distant cousin. I didn't know her well, and she was actually an older woman, so,
let me revise that. It was very cool.
It was very cool. Her daughter told me she lived a good life, but I have to say it was kind of cool. It was kind of amazing to be a part of that.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And I think it's as of 2014, if I'm not mistaken, you now can only enter Cemetery One with a guide, with a tour guide. Oh. You can't go in there on your own anymore because it's been so desecrated.
Oh,
isn't that sad?
Horrible. Yeah, that is very sad.
It's very sad. So I guess next time I go to see my family plots, I will have to go with a tour guide to visit them. Kind of sad. But here's the other interesting thing. So Marie allowed friends and even strangers to be buried in her family tomb.
That is interesting.
She owned 2 tombs in Cemetery Number 1. And the one that she is buried in has 78 people in it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Come one, come all.
Yeah. Well, again, it just speaks to her
open-heartedness.
Her open-heartedness, her graciousness, her kindness. There were probably a lot of people who couldn't afford to have a proper burial.
Well,
or
that
to have
says a lot about her, yeah.
And so she just made it known to her family when she died, whoever needs a place to die, please let them join me in my tomb.
Wow.
Pretty amazing.
Yeah.
That's a pretty amazing thing. To this day, people go there and they put money on her grave. Of course, they have to go to the tour guide. They put money on her grave. Sometimes they put little gifts on her grave. They put their hands on their grave, and sometimes they'll make a wish that they say their wish is granted.
Oh.
So if we listen to the guides on those ghost tours or the voodoo tours, then we also learn that Marie Laveau's ghost still roams the city, flying over graves, dancing in cemeteries, walking down streets in the French Quarter, and haunting local shops. So people have a lot of experience, apparently, with seeing Marie Laveau. And take the story of Elmer Lee Banks, for example. This is back in the 30s, but he reportedly saw Marie Laveau's ghost one day near Cemetery Number 1. And he recalled it was an old woman dressed in a long white dress, and she came into the drugstore where he was a customer, and she stood next to him. And he had been telling the drugstore owner what he needed, and he noticed that the owner became kind of bug-eyed and ran out like a fool to the back of the store. So not knowing what was going on, Elmer looked and said to the old woman, "Wow, I wonder what happened there." He started laughing, and finally the woman said, "Don't you know me?" And Elmer replied, "Why, no, ma'am, I don't. I don't know where that drugstore man went. Do you?" And apparently that was the wrong answer, because she suddenly slapped Banks upside the head.
Oh.
And according to Banks, she then jumped up in the air and went whizzing out the door over the top of the telephone wires, and she passed right over the graveyard wall and disappeared. And then, he says, he passed out cold. So, Banks said he was only awakened by whiskey being poured down his throat by the drugstore man, who told him, "That was Marie Laveau. She'd been dead for years and years, but every now and then she comes back. And, son, you've just been slapped by the Queen of Voodoo." That's pretty funny, right?
That is pretty funny.
So, to this day, in the city of New Orleans, Marie Laveau remains a figure of devotion on whom followers call for help in all different matters. And again, people leave those offerings. They leave white rum and candy, apparently. She liked white rum and candy, and they ask for her assistance. And supposedly, her gravestone is still one of the most visited pilgrim sites in the United States, right up there with the king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley.
Oh, wow. Very cool.
Yeah, and her story and her legacy are surrounded by legend and lore, given her influence in the voodoo community and the impact on New Orleans society, to the point where for years tourists visited her supposed resting place, and they would draw X marks in accordance with an old tradition that said Laveau would grant them a wish if they drew an X on her tomb, and then turned around 3 times and then knocked on the tomb and then yelled out their wish.
Huh.
It's kind of elaborate.
Yeah.
Do you want me to say it again in case anybody wants to do that?
Yeah, just in case, you know.
Okay.
Get a tour guide.
Okay, get some pen and paper. You go up, you make an X on her tomb with, I don't know, chalk. I don't know.
Yeah, please don't bring a marker.
Yeah, what is the tour guide going to say when you do that?
Right.
Okay, so then you turn around 3 times, and then you knock on the tomb, and you yell out your wish. Please,
Let me live to be 274.
okay, please let me live to be 274. So if that wish is granted, you have to come back, and then you have to circle the X
Oh.
and leave an offering.
Oh, wow.
So apparently, her tomb has also been desecrated with a lot of X's.
X's and O's. That's hysterical.
I know.
Maybe that's why there's the tour guy now.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know if you'd be able to get away with that.
I'm guessing you can't.
Probably not anymore.
Yeah, not so much.
But we know that she was a woman of strong convictions, loyal confidentiality. Her power seemed impossible, so impossible. Some people still think she works her voodoo magic from beyond the grave. People have sworn that they have left offerings, and after their wish was granted, they could hear her whispering in their ear. And then they would often see ghostly images show up in photos of her tomb as well.
Oh.
So people say she's still alive and well, so to speak.
Mm.
So that is my Sheela of the day, Marie Laveau. Kind of spooky, kind of Halloween-y.
Spooky, yeah, you learn something new every day.
And it gave us all a better understanding of voodoo.
Yeah, absolutely,
Which
yeah.
I think is interesting, and it makes me want to go learn more about voodoo.
It makes me want to go online and try to look for pictures that don't exist.
Right.
Marie Laveau.
I think I want to create my own little gree bag.
Ooh, that'd be fun.
That would be fun, wouldn't it?
Freak out your children.
Yeah, they wouldn't freak out. They would think it was interesting.
Ah,
They would think that was interesting, you
it
know?
was really interesting, yeah.
But, you know, it's sad that, again, when people do something unknown or different, or that they're ostracized, or people see them as evil.
Right. Or weird, or just somehow dismissed.
Yeah.
Or, yeah.
We see that, you know, we see it with a lot of our Sheelas. People make fun of them.
Yeah, it's true.
They underestimate them.
Yeah.
They don't credit them. So I'm really happy to be able to put some light, shed some light on Marie Laveau today. Thank you for listening, everybody.
Thank you for listening.
And happy Halloween. We have one more
Halloween.
Halloween episode coming up.
We do.
It's going to be very exciting.
Woo.
Tune in next week for our last Halloween episode.
Bye.
All right, bye, everybody.
Sheela, Sheela, Sheela.